It was a little past 1 in the morning when the last door of my life slammed shut behind me. New York at that hour feels like a living creature, restless and cold, and the December air cut through my suit like shards of glass. I stood there on the wet granite steps of Cole Analytics, the very headquarters I had built from nothing, as two security guards blocked the only entrance I had ever used for the past 10 years. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head and a face that looked carved from stone, tightened his grip on my arm and said, "Sir, you need to leave now. This premises is no longer accessible to you." I stared at him through the rain as disbelief washed over me. "This is my building, my company." He did not blink. Not anymore. Another guard stepped forward as if I might try to force my way back inside. I was too stunned to even argue, too numb to process the fact that in less than 24 hours, I had gone from being the so-called silver visionary of Wall Street to being escorted out of my own company like a criminal. All around us, lights flickered behind the glass walls, the afterglow of a board meeting that had destroyed everything. My assets were frozen. The stock had tanked. A fraudulent signature on a $300 million contract had sparked an investigation, and somehow, impossibly, my name appeared on the paperwork. I tried telling them the signature was forged. I tried explaining I had been set up. No one cared. The board voted me out in 14 minutes. 14 minutes to erase 10 years of my life. My breath fogged in the air as I held a stack of files against my chest, the last documents I grabbed from my office before they pushed me out. They were soaked already, the rain creeping into every edge. A folder slipped from my arm and hit the pavement. The papers inside spilled out, spreading across the sidewalk like a broken deck of cards. I knelt down to gather them, feeling every pair of eyes on me, from people passing under umbrellas or hurrying toward the subway. Someone whispered, "Is that Adrian Cole?" and another muttered, "Thought he would be in handcuffs by now." A third voice laughed, "Look at him! Rich guy scrambling in the gutter for scraps." I clenched my jaw and reached for a page, sliding toward a puddle, when a security guard stepped between me and the paper, forcing me back with his hand. "Sir, do not approach the building again. This is for your safety. And ours. For my safety." The absurdity made my chest tighten. This was the place I had poured everything into, nights without sleep, weekends without rest, birthdays missed, a marriage lost, and now I was being treated like a trespasser. I swallowed the sharp taste of humiliation and kept collecting the soaked sheets. Rain hammered the sidewalk. My knees were freezing. My hands shook as I reached for another paper that had blown farther down the steps. Wind lifted it again, carrying it toward the street before dropping it near the curb. I pushed up to my feet, ignoring the way the guards stiffened as if I might run back into the building. "I just want my documents," I said, but the words came out thin and tired, swallowed by the noise of distant traffic. The wind rose again, snapping through the canyon of skyscrapers like it enjoyed watching me fall apart. It caught several pages from my arms, ripping them out of my grasp and scattering them into the gutter. I lunged after the nearest one, but a passing taxi splashed through a puddle, drenching the paper and my sleeves. My hair clung to my forehead. My clothes were soaked through. A couple walking by slowed down, staring at me like I was some cautionary tale. The woman whispered, "That's him, the CEO who tanked his own company." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but what would be the point? No one wanted an explanation. The world had already decided who I was. A failure, a fraud, a man worth stepping around. I crouched again, grabbing whatever pages I could reach, when I noticed something odd. The most important document I had taken from my office, the one I had tucked into the center of the stack, was missing. Apollo 91. The algorithm draft I had spent nearly 2 years building. A system that could have saved everything if it had been completed in time. I sifted frantically through the wet papers in my hands, then scanned the sidewalk, the street, the stairs. Nothing. The wind howled again, colder, sharper, as if mocking me. Somewhere in the chaos of the last few minutes, it must have slipped out and blown away. I stood there in the middle of the storm-drenched, exhausted, stripped of every shred of authority I had ever possessed. Cars hissed past on the slick street. The guards watched me with impatient expressions. People hurried by without a second glance. And somewhere in the distance, carried by the wind, the page that could have saved my life disappeared into the night. That was the exact moment everything ended. And though I did not know it yet, that was also the moment everything began. Before the night, everything collapsed. People used to say my life looked like the American dream, polished to perfection. They saw the headlines the magazine covers, the interviews where I spoke with calm certainty about data modeling, predictive finance, and the future of digital markets. They saw a man who had risen from nothing to build one of the most respected analytics platforms in New York. What they did not see was the 20-year stretch of loneliness that had carved itself into the marrow of who I was. I grew up in a cramped apartment over a laundromat in Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and slept 3 hours a night. She used to tell me the world would not hand me anything, that if I wanted a life beyond survival, I had to build it myself. She died when I was 27, 3 years before Cole Analytics became real. I still remember standing beside her hospital bed as she took her last breath, my hands on her blanket, promising her I would make something of myself. Maybe that was why I never stopped working once I started. I was terrified that if I slowed down even a little, everything would slip away the way she had. I taught myself coding after my shifts at a warehouse job, scribbling algorithms on napkins during lunch breaks. When I finally landed a junior position at a hedge fund, I treated it like life or death. I studied harder than everyone, learned the entire system from top to bottom, and within 3 years, I knew I had something no one else did: a vision for a model that could process financial risk in real time. It was imperfect then, barely more than a sketch in a notebook, but it grew. I poured every dollar I had into forming the company. I worked through holidays. I slept on the office couch. I ate from vending machines. I forgot what weekends felt like. Friends drifted away because I never answered calls. My wife left after 4 years of marriage. She told me she felt like a ghost in her own home, that I was married to the company, not to her. I remember the night she packed her bags. I did not even realize it was happening until she said, "You are not here, Adrian. You have not been here for years." And the worst part was she was right. I let her go, telling myself that sacrifices were part of success, that I would make it up later. But later never came. I thought being rich would fill the loneliness. It did not. It just gave me nicer ways to hide it. Even when Cole Analytics became one of the top financial tech firms in the state, even when my name appeared on lists with people I had once admired from afar, there was a constant murmur beneath everything, a sense that no one truly saw me, only the myth of who I was supposed to be. The media called me the silver visionary because of the streaks of gray that appeared early in my hair, a side effect of years of stress. They wrote articles claiming I was cold, calculating, robotic, and capable of emotion. They said I had climbed too fast, that I had cut corners, that my success had come from luck rather than grit. Reporters tried to paint me as a man disconnected from reality, someone who cared more about data points than human beings. My employees treated me with reverence but fear, stepping back when I passed through hallways or lowering their voices when I entered a room. No one ever asked how I was doing. No one wondered why I stayed in the office until dawn. No one knew that I kept my mother's old voicemail on my phone and played it sometimes just to hear her say my name. I spent so long being strong that I forgot how to be anything else. I used to believe I was invincible. I had climbed too far, learned too much, fought too hard for anyone to knock me down. I believed that if a storm ever came, I would be ready, but nothing prepares you for a collapse you never see coming. The morning before everything fell apart, I stood in my penthouse kitchen, sipping coffee and reviewing early test results for Apollo 91, the algorithm I believed would revolutionize our risk modeling. I felt confident, maybe even proud. It was one of the rare moments I allowed myself to feel like the years of sacrifice had been worth it. I remember thinking that I had finally reached the point where the future felt stable, where I could breathe. I remember thinking I had time. I was wrong. All it took was 24 hours to turn the so-called silver visionary into the man the world pointed at with a mixture of pity and disgust. Losing everything so suddenly has a way of peeling back illusions. It forces you to see exactly how fragile you are. If I am being honest, part of me understood that I had built my success on a foundation that was stronger than most, but still breakable. I just never expected the breaking to come in the form of a forged signature, a frozen account, and the feeling of standing in the street at 1 in the morning, clutching a handful of soaked documents, with no one left willing to listen. I did not know then that buried among the papers I lost that night was the one thing that might save me. I did not know someone else had found it. Someone who did not know my name or my history or the myths the world told about me. Someone who, by all accounts, should have walked right past it, but she did not. She picked it up, looked at it like it meant something, and changed the course of my life before I even realized hers had crossed mine. The night everything collapsed did not feel real at first. It felt like a badly timed dream, the kind that wakes you with your heart racing but fades into nothing the moment you open your eyes. Except this one did not fade. It sharpened. It hardened. It calcified into the kind of memory you cannot outrun. It began at 3 in the morning when my phone rang on the nightstand, its buzz slicing through the quiet of my penthouse. I answered half awake, expecting some harmless alert or a system ping from our trading servers. Instead, I heard my legal advisor's voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "Adrian, we have a problem. A contract worth $300 million, one that supposedly bore my signature as primary guarantor, was being flagged as fraudulent. The signature matched mine perfectly down to the slant of the A and the pressure at the tail of the N, but I had never signed it. I sat up in bed, cold dread moving through me as he explained that the partner who was supposed to co-sign had backed out suddenly, claiming to have no knowledge of the deal at all. Without the partner, the entire risk fell on me. Before I could call anyone or confirm anything, news spread. By 6 in the morning, financial channels were running headlines about an internal scandal at Coal Analytics. By 8, banks had begun freezing assets tied to the company. At 9, our stock started its freefall. I watched numbers plummet on the screen like a lifeline being cut. Employees flooded me with emails asking what happened, but their messages changed tone by noon. Questions shifted into suspicions. People who had once praised me for my transparency suddenly whispered that maybe I had misled them all along. Investors who had sat at my table and toasted to the future now acted as though I had personally torched their portfolios. By mid-afternoon, the crisis hit its peak. I walked into the executive floor and felt something I had never felt before in my own building: fear. Not mine. Theirs. People avoided my eyes. Conversations stopped the moment I passed. Some stepped aside quickly as if my downfall were contagious. At 3:15, the board called an emergency vote. They summoned me into the conference room where I had spent a decade building the future of my company. But instead of strategy charts and excited debate, I found silence and faces that had already made up their minds. "Adrian, we are suspending you, effective immediately." The words cut deeper than I expected. One of the directors added that it was for the good of the company, that the public needed reassurance that leadership required a fresh start in a moment of crisis. Not one person defended me. Not one asked for my side. Not one questioned the possibility that I might be innocent. When they told me I had 10 minutes to leave the building, something inside me cracked. I gathered the nearest documents I could from my office, stuffing them blindly into my arms. I knew they were incomplete, messy, disorganized, but I did not have time to sort anything. The security chief himself escorted me to the lobby. He avoided looking directly at me as if ashamed, or worse, as if convinced of my guilt. When we stepped outside, cameras flashed instantly. Reporters shouted my name, demanding answers. Some accused, some mocked. Some asked if I had anything to say before the investigation. I tried to speak, but my voice was swallowed by rain that had begun to fall in cold sheets. Security told me to move along, as if I were some stranger loitering in front of a building I had poured my soul into. When I stepped back, my heel slipped on the wet pavement and the stack of documents in my arms scattered across the sidewalk. Papers flew everywhere, some sticking to the ground, others drifting toward the gutter. I dropped to my knees, trying to collect them, water soaking through my clothes. People walked around me, not one stopping to help. A few recorded videos. One man muttered that he expected better from someone who pretended to be brilliant. Someone else said I should be in handcuffs. I felt humiliation burn under my skin hotter than the rain was cold. I did not even realize I was trembling until a page slid from my fingers and disappeared into the gutter water. I grabbed at every remaining sheet, unaware that one page, the most important one, the early draft of Apollo 91, had already been swept down the street by the wind. I stood there in the storm, clutching a half-ruined stack of files, the company badge still clipped to my coat, even though it was no longer mine. I felt the weight of failure settle heavily on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I truly felt the meaning of the phrase, rock bottom. I walked away from the building that had once felt like home and became just another man, drenched and defeated in the New York night. I would have given anything to rewind 24 hours, anything to explain myself, anything to keep even a shred of dignity. But no one was listening. No one cared. I did not know then that somewhere in a parking lot a few blocks away in the hands of someone who had never once spoken to me, the page that would change everything had already been picked up. I did not know her name. I did not know her face. I did not know she would become the hinge on which my entire life turned. All I knew that night was that everything I had built had collapsed, and I was alone in the ruins. I did not know it then, standing in the rain outside the building that had once carried my name, but the single page that mattered most was already far from me. The wind had dragged it across a loading zone on the far side of the block, past dumpsters and parked delivery vans, across oil streaks and broken glass, until it caught beneath the wheel of a janitorial cart being pushed by someone whose existence I had never once acknowledged. Her name was Mira Dawson, though I didn't learn that until much later. At that moment, she was simply a silhouette under a flickering streetlight, bundled in an oversized navy jacket, her brown hair pulled into a messy knot that looked like she had redone it 3 times during her shift. It was past midnight, the hour when New York finally paused long enough for people like her to breathe. Mira worked the overnight cleaning crew for the older tower next to ours, a building Cole Analytics had used as temporary workspace years ago before relocating. The older floors still held ghost traces of our early days, but I had not stepped foot in that place in years. Mira, however, lived in its shadows every night, mopping its hallways, scrubbing restrooms, wiping down empty conference rooms that still smelled faintly of the ambitions people like me had left behind. She was 24, though the long hours and stress etched something older into the quiet seriousness of her eyes. Mira wasn't tall and didn't carry herself with the loud confidence you see in people who believe life owes them something. Instead, she moved with a careful, almost invisible grace, as if trying not to take up more space than necessary. She worked 2 jobs. At night, she cleaned offices. During the day, she attended a community college data science program, always exhausted, always pushing through. I could not have imagined then that someone who lived so far outside my world would end up being the person who understood my work better than the people I paid millions. That night, while I was losing everything, she was finishing the final hour of her shift. It was the kind of cold that seeps through your shoes, the kind of wind that bends your breath. She was pushing her cart toward the service entrance when something white fluttered at the edge of her vision. A single sheet of paper soaked around the edges danced across the cracked asphalt like it didn't belong in a place meant for forgotten things. Curious, she stepped toward it, catching it with the toe of her shoe before it blew away again. Mira bent down, gloves scraping wet pavement, and lifted the page carefully as if it were something fragile. She squinted under the dim yellow security light. The page was covered in symbols, formulas, scribbled notes, and messy revisions. To most people, it would have looked like nonsense. To a janitor working 2 survival jobs, it should have meant nothing. But Mira was not most people. She stared at it longer than she meant to, her breath visible in the cold air. Something about the page drew her in like a melody she almost recognized but couldn't place. She couldn't have known it was the early draft of Apollo 91, the algorithm I had been refining in secret, the one thing in the entire company that could have proven I wasn't the reckless fraud headlines now painted me to be. The draft was incomplete, still raw, still chaotic. But even in its chaos, it held the blueprint of something powerful, something I had nearly finished before the world collapsed on top of me. Mira turned the page over and saw my initials faintly sketched in the corner. She didn't know the name. She wasn't someone who followed market news or listened to financial breakdowns on podcasts. She only knew that whoever had written this was either a genius, a madman, or someone desperately trying to create something worth saving. She tucked the paper into the inside pocket of her jacket beside the worn notebook she always carried. Not because she thought it belonged to anyone important, not because she wanted something from it, but because it felt wrong to leave it on the pavement, destined to dissolve in gutter water and engine grease. She went back to her cart and continued pushing it up the ramp wheels, rattling over potholes. A strand of hair slipped from her knot and fell across her cheek, but she didn't bother brushing it away. She just kept moving, unaware she had picked up the one thing that could pull me out of the ruin my life had become. Later that night, after she finished her route, she would step into the small break room on the 12th floor of the old tower. She would sit alone at the metal table with its chipped paint and cold surface. From her pocket, she would pull out the paper she found and smooth it gently with the flat of her palm. She would study it with quiet curiosity, not realizing that in her hands she held the reason everything around me had collapsed and the only piece left that could possibly put it back together. While I wandered the streets trying to figure out how my empire had vanished in a day, Mira sat with the page between her fingers, tracing its lines like she was reading a language she almost understood. And though I didn't know her, though we had never crossed paths, though she was invisible in a world that only noticed success and spotlight that night, she became the first person in days who didn't see me as a criminal or a failure. She didn't see me at all, but she held a piece of me that could still matter. And fate had just begun weaving us toward each other without either of us realizing it. I did not know where that page landed or who touched it after it slipped from my grasp, but while I lay awake in a cheap rented room in Queens, replaying every moment of my downfall, that page was sitting on a small, wobbly desk in a cramped apartment in the Bronx. Mira Dawson's apartment was the kind of place most New Yorkers start in when life gives them nothing but bills a single room with peeling paint, a mattress on the floor, and a space heater that rattled louder than it warmed. Her window overlooked an alleyway where dumpsters sat crooked and cats rummaged through cardboard at night. The radiator hissed constantly, the kind of white noise that could drive someone mad unless they were used to surviving. She kicked off her worn shoes, dropped her backpack on the floor, and set the paper on her desk next to a cup of instant noodles she hadn't touched yet. Mira worked 2 jobs and took night classes. Sleep was optional. Hunger was negotiable. But curiosity, she always gave time to. She unzipped her jacket and pulled out the page, smoothing it gently with the back of her hand. She tilted her head, scanning the scribbled formulas, the half-written logic paths, the crossed-out annotations. Most people would have ignored it, but Mira knew numbers the way some people know music. She wasn't a prodigy. She wasn't a genius. She was simply someone who learned to see patterns because patterns were safer than people. She traced the top row with her fingertip, murmuring the variables under her breath, like she was reading a foreign language she had once studied but hadn't practiced in years. Then something in her expression changed, a small tightening around her eyes. Her brow furrowed slightly. Not confusion, recognition. She recognized the structure, the framework, the architecture of a model built to predict market shifts before they became visible. She had been studying similar concepts in her data science program concepts, far simpler than what she held now, but close enough that she could see what the page was trying to do. She picked up her graphite pencil, the same one she used to annotate old textbooks borrowed from the college library, and began writing small notes in the margins. Her handwriting was small, neat, the kind born from using cheap notebooks where space mattered. She circled 3 lines near the top. "The timing variable is off," she whispered to herself, almost like she was afraid her voice might break the fragile thread of concentration. She flipped open her worn notebook, the one she stitched new edges onto when the binding began to fall apart. She wrote the variable down, rewrote it, then plugged in a different number, muttering something about response curves and lag windows. If someone had watched her, they might have mistaken her for a seasoned analyst. But Mira had no degree, no license, no office. She had a mop handle, sore hands, and a dream she wasn't even sure she deserved. She continued reading. The deeper she went, the more the lines made sense. The algorithm wasn't just experimental. It was daring, unfiltered, raw. Whoever wrote at me, not that she knew my name yet, had been trying to solve something big but had overlooked a few critical pieces. Not because of incompetence, because of noise. Noise created by chaos, pressure, burnout, or maybe betrayal. She didn't know that every mark she traced was born out of the last months of my life. The long nights, the unanswered questions, the creeping dread I had been too stubborn to admit was growing around me. She only saw the potential. At one point, she paused, sat back in her chair, and whispered, "Someone gave up on this too fast." She returned to annotating the edges. Small adjustments, soft corrections, suggestions, not replacements. The kind of notes someone writes when they respect the original blueprint. At around 3 in the morning, her eyes began to sting. She rubbed them with the heel of her palm, pushed her hair from her forehead, and leaned closer to the page again. She had circled a section about volatility tracking 3 times. Something about it bothered her. She did the math twice, then a third time. Then her eyes widened just slightly. The formula underestimated real-time sentiment. The lag would cause inaccurate predictions during market stress. She wrote, "This part fails under pressure, needs feedback loop increase." She stared at the words she wrote. She wasn't sure she was right. She wasn't sure she had any right to question the mind behind the model, but her pencil didn't lie. Patterns didn't lie. Numbers never lied to her, unlike people. Outside, sirens echoed through the Bronx streets. Somewhere a baby cried. Somewhere else a couple argued. Life in all its messy noise continued. But Mira kept reading even when she grew tired, even when she told herself she should sleep. By 4:30, her noodles were stone cold. Her pencil was nearly out of lead. Her notebook was covered in graphs arrows, rewritten formulas. She exhaled slowly, letting the weight of what she had done settle in her chest. She didn't know if the page belonged to someone important. She didn't know if it was tied to the financial crisis unfolding in the city at that very moment. She didn't know that her pencil marks were the first lifeline thrown at a drowning man. She only knew one thing. This should not go in the trash, even if it meant nothing. Even if she never saw the person behind it, even if it wasn't her place to fix anything. She folded the paper carefully, slid it into her notebook, and rested her head briefly on her arms. Before she drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, she whispered to herself, whoever wrote this was trying to build something, and maybe they shouldn't give up yet. And somewhere across the city, in a dim rented room, I stared at the ceiling, thinking everything I built was dead. Not realizing that someone I had never met was already breathing life back into it. 2 days passed before I had the courage to return to the older building, the one we had used years ago before coal analytics expanded. I told myself I was going back for practical reasons, that maybe some archived documents had been left behind in storage, something I could use to untangle the mess I had been thrown into. But the truth was simpler and far more pathetic. I had nowhere else to go. No office. No staff. No home I could safely return to without being chased by reporters. The old tower felt like a relic of the version of me that hadn't yet been destroyed. I thought maybe stepping inside would remind me of who I used to be. Instead, all it reminded me of was how far I had fallen. The lobby security guard narrowed his eyes at me the moment I entered, as if recognizing my face from the news. He asked why I was there. I tried to explain I had old files stored on the 12th floor, but his stare stayed cold and unmoved. He escorted me as if I were a potential threat rather than the man who once paid the building's rent. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out and felt a strange weight settle around me. This place had once felt full of possibility. Now it felt like the aftertaste of a life I no longer owned. I walked down the hall toward the old meeting rooms when I heard a cart rolling slowly behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I wasn't in the mood to face anyone, least of all staff who probably recognized me as the disgraced CEO who tanked his own company. But the cart slowed, then stopped. Then a quiet voice said, "You dropped this." At first, I didn't understand. I turned and saw her for the first time clearly. Mira. Brown hair pulled into that messy knot. Again, jacket zipped all the way up, eyes steady but unsure. In her hands was a single page, flattened and clean, despite the faint water stains that marked its earlier fall from grace. She held it out with both hands like it mattered. Like I mattered. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I forced myself to speak, though my voice came out smaller than I expected. "Where did you get that?" She hesitated, shifting her weight slightly like she wasn't sure if giving it back was the right thing. "Parking lot 2 nights ago," she said. "It blew under my cart. I thought it was trash, but then I read it. My heart jolted." "You read it." Not accusing, just stunned. She nodded once. "I studied data science at Bronx Community. I recognized pieces of it." My throat tightened with something I didn't want to name. Shame, embarrassment, exhaustion, gratitude, fear, all tangled together. I took the page from her slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of her glove. Her handwriting lined the margins, neat notes, precise, corrections, small insights that made too much sense. I swallowed hard. "You fixed parts of it." She shook her head quickly. "Not fixed, just commented." I wasn't sure if I should. I frowned not at her, but at myself. A janitor was making more sense of my algorithm than half the analysts I had hired. Not because she was better than them, because she wasn't clouded by ego or pressure or corporate noise. She simply saw the truth in the numbers. I looked down at the page, then back at her. "Why didn't you throw it away?" Mira's eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. "It didn't look like garbage," she said quietly. "Someone worked hard on it." I felt the sting again, harder this time. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She shifted the cart slightly, unsure if she should leave. I forced myself to ask, "Did you know who I was?" She shook her head. "I saw your face on the news later, but I didn't pick it up because of that. I picked it up because it felt unfinished." Something in me snapped, not painfully, but deeply, like a door creaking open inside a house long abandoned. I didn't want her to see how much her words hit me. I cleared my throat, trying to regain some control. "Thank you," I said, but it came out strained like gratitude mixed with irritation. Irritation at myself, not her. She nodded and took a small step back. "I thought it mattered," she said softly. Her voice was calm, not pitying, not dramatic, just honest, something I was no longer used to. Before I could respond, the elevator dinged at the end of the hallway and 2 employees stepped out. They stared at me, whispered to each other, then looked at Mira like she was standing too close to a dangerous man. I felt heat rise in my chest. The humiliation returned with full force. She noticed it. She looked at them briefly, then back at me, her expression unchanged, unbothered by their judgment. It gave me a strange sense of steadiness, like she wasn't seeing who the world told her I was. Just the man standing in front of her. I folded the page gently, too gently, for something that had been abandoned 2 nights earlier. I wanted to say something meaningful. Maybe thank her again. Maybe ask why she wrote such thoughtful notes. Maybe ask how she understood the model so quickly. Instead, all I managed was a quiet, awkward, "You didn't have to do this." Mira met my eyes for the first time. "I know, I just didn't want to see something unfinished get thrown away." Then she pushed her cart around me and walked down the hall, wheels rattling softly, her silhouette shrinking but leaving a mark deeper than I expected. I stood there gripping the page like it was a lifeline, and for the first time since everything collapsed, I felt a small spark flicker in my chest. Not hope exactly, something quieter, something fragile, something that might grow if I didn't crush it too quickly. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the turning point, not because of the page, but because someone who had no reason to care looked at something I created and said without saying it that it wasn't dead yet. And maybe neither was I. I left the building that day with the folded page in my coat pocket, the pencil marks pressing softly against the fabric, as if reminding me they existed, reminding me someone had seen value in something I had given up on. I walked without knowing where I was going, passing storefronts and steam vents and the endless churn of New York traffic until I found myself standing in front of a budget hotel with flickering neon lights. I booked a room under a false name because I couldn't risk the crowd of cameras outside my penthouse. The room smelled faintly of bleach and wet carpet, but it was quiet, and for the first time in 48 hours, I needed quiet more than comfort. I sat at the small desk, turned on the yellow lamp, and unfolded the page Mira had given back to me. I studied her notes line by line. They were not guesses or lucky observations. They were the kind of insights people spend years learning to see. Her pencil circled a volatility lag I had missed entirely. She had rewritten an equation with a correction so subtle and clean it made my breath catch. She had seen through the mess of my burnout and my rushed revisions, saw the skeleton of what I had been building beneath the wreckage. I sat there with my elbows on the desk, fingers pressed against my forehead, trying to understand how a janitor working overnight shifts had found clarity where a room full of Ivy League analysts had not. For the first time since the collapse, my mind quieted enough for something other than fear to slip in. Possibility. I hadn't felt that in days. That spark was small, almost laughably small, but it was real. And it was enough to make me do something I never imagined myself doing. I decided I had to find her. Not because she owed me anything, not because I wanted to drag her into my mess, but because she had seen something in the algorithm that meant I wasn't entirely lost. The next afternoon, I went back to the old tower. The security guard watched me with suspicion, but I ignored him. I waited near the service elevators, leaning against the wall, clutching the folded page like it might disappear again if I let go. When the elevator dinged, Mira stepped out, pushing her cart hair pulled into that same messy knot headphones around her neck, though she wasn't listening to anything. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, the kind of surprise someone gets when they expected a problem, not a person. I stepped forward before I could overthink it. "Mira!" She slowed the cart. "Hi," she said quietly. There was no fear in her face, no discomfort, just a kind of steady calmness I wasn't used to. I took out the page and handed it to her. "I read your notes." She blinked once, unsure if she should apologize or defend herself. So I continued before she could. "And you were right. Dead right. The timing variable, the response lag, the sentiment weight, all of it. You saw things I didn't." She looked down at the page, then at me. "I wasn't sure if I crossed a line," she said softly. I shook my head. "If anything, you found the line I completely missed." She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but swallowed by restraint. I rubbed the back of my neck. "This might sound strange," I said, landing each word carefully, "but I could use your help." Just to look at a few other pieces. Mira looked startled, as if I had asked her to solve world hunger instead of help with a broken algorithm. "I'm not a professional," she said quickly. "I clean offices. I barely sleep. I study between jobs. I'm not even sure I know what I'm doing half the time." "Neither do I," said before thinking. Then I shook my head, trying again. "I mean, neither do I right now." And somehow that made her smile small, cautious, but real. A shift happened, then something subtle but unmistakable. Not friendship, not trust, not yet. But something like two people standing in a storm, realizing they were both soaked and freezing, and maybe it would hurt less if they stood closer instead of apart. Mira exhaled slowly. "Do you want to sit somewhere and talk through it? There's a cafe on 3rd Avenue. Cheap, but it has outlets." I nodded, relieved she didn't turn away. We walked to the cafe together, her cart parked in the storage room, her jacket zipped tight against the cold. The bell over the door chimed softly when we entered. The place smelled like burnt espresso and old pastries, but it was warm, and warmth felt like luxury. We sat at a small table in the corner. Mira pulled out her notebook, the one with stitched edges and graphite smudges, and laid the page between us. She didn't speak much at first. She pointed, she scribbled, she corrected. She explained with a quiet certainty I hadn't expected. I watched her absorbing every thoughtful movement, every detail she noticed, every moment she paused to think. At one point I said, "You see patterns like you're hearing them like they're music." Mira looked at me surprised. "My grandmother used to say that. She taught me piano when I was little." I smiled faintly. "Makes sense. You read algorithms the way musicians read sheet music." Mira's cheeks warmed slightly, but she didn't look away. That night, surrounded by chipped tables and cheap coffee, something changed in me. The fear didn't vanish. The shame didn't lift completely. But the hopelessness cracked. I had someone across the table who didn't see a disgraced CEO or a headline. She saw the work. She saw the numbers. She saw the unfinished piece I hadn't been able to defend alone. And for the first time since losing everything, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't fighting for air by myself. That was the first spark of hope. Small, flickering, but enough to light the path forward. For the next 2 weeks, Mira and I lived in the shadows of the city, moving quietly through corners most people never notice. We didn't meet in offices or boardrooms or glass towers lined with suits and polished ambition. We met in forgotten places, the kind where no one bothers to look, the public libraries that stayed open late, the 24-hour diners with flickering lights, the back tables of community college study halls, anywhere that offered warmth, a table, and anonymity. I didn't dare be seen in daylight. My face was still splashed across financial news segments, still circulating online with captions about fraud and incompetence and disgrace. I wasn't ready to face the world, not when I had nothing to defend myself with. Not when all I had left was a single page of an algorithm and the unlikely mind of a janitor who saw more in it than anyone else. And so we worked in the shadows night after night, side by side. The first time we met at the Bronx Public Library, Mira arrived carrying a backpack stuffed with textbooks, her notebook, and a small plastic container of homemade sandwiches that she set down without a word. "For you," she said quietly. I hadn't eaten yet, and she must have sensed it. I thanked her, and she simply nodded like it wasn't a kindness, just something that needed to be done. While I ate, she pulled out the page again and smoothed it on the table, her finger following the logic path we had talked about the night before. She didn't ask for permission to continue helping. She didn't ask for credit or compensation or reassurance. She just worked because something in her believed the algorithm deserved a chance, even if I didn't. On the second night, I brought her a new set of pencils. She blinked down at the small package, her expression softening like no one had given her anything meant just for her in a very long time. She didn't say thank you, but the small smile that tugged at her mouth was enough. By the fifth night, our rhythm had become so natural that we barely needed words to communicate. Mira would push her hair behind her ear, and I would know she had found a new inconsistency. I would open my notebook to a fresh page, and she would immediately slide her notes toward me. She was observant in a way that felt almost surgical, dissecting the algorithm line by line until the broken pieces revealed their true shape. When she worked, her face softened into focus, her eyes narrowing just slightly. She didn't fidget, didn't rush, didn't pretend to know more than she did. She thought, she analyzed, she corrected, and she did it all with an unspoken humility that made every insight feel like a revelation. I began to look forward to those nights in a way that unsettled me, not because of the algorithm, though, that mattered more than almost anything in my life, but because sitting across from her felt like sitting across from the one person who hadn't already decided who I was. She didn't see a headline. She didn't see a ruined CEO. She saw a man trying to understand what had gone wrong, and she met that effort with her own. Late one evening in the corner booth of a diner that smelled of frying oil and burnt coffee, Mira traced a line in her notebook with her pencil and murmured, "You're missing a conditional." I leaned in. "Where?" She pointed. "Here. When the market hits stress threshold, the model still treats sentiment as static. But it isn't. It never is." I felt the air leave my lungs. She was right. Again. I ran my fingers through my hair and stared at her. "How do you see that?" She shrugged, almost embarrassed. "You wrote it like you were running from something. You missed things because you were moving too fast." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I had been running from rumors from a partner who suddenly went silent from signs of sabotage. I ignored because it was easier to believe the people around me were loyal. But I didn't tell her that yet. There were still pieces of myself I wasn't ready to let anyone see. Not even Mira. A few nights later, rain hammered against the windows of the library as we worked through another revision. Mira's hair had slipped from its knot, falling in loose strands around her face. She pushed it back again and again, but it kept falling forward. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black hair tie I had found earlier near the entrance. "Here," I said. She blinked, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," I said quietly. "But it keeps falling." She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing mine for a split second. A subtle contact, but enough to send a small current through my chest. She tied her hair back, and for a moment she looked younger, softer. Then the moment passed and she leaned back over the algorithm like nothing had shifted. But something had shifted. Not between us exactly, but inside me. I felt it like a light cracking through a boarded window. One night, near midnight, after hours of running through scenarios, Mira suddenly paused. "Wait," she whispered. "I think I found the root problem." She tapped the page. "Your original risk adjustment curve collapses under multi-directional stress. It doesn't adapt. It panics, just like you did." The last words slipped out before she could stop them. She slapped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. I looked at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, I smiled. "You're not wrong." She relaxed a little, lowering her hand. "Sorry. I'm blunt sometimes." "Don't be. Blunt is useful. Blunt is honest." She nodded, then drew a new curve beneath the original one. "This one adapts. It breathes." I stared at it as the shape formed. It was beautiful. A solution I hadn't found. A solution no one at the firm had found. Mira Dawson, a janitor with stitched notebook edges and graphite dust on her fingers, had just given me the missing piece of a model that could save everything I had lost. That night, as we walked out of the library together, our footsteps echoing through the nearly empty halls, I realized something with absolute clarity. I wasn't working in the shadows because I was hiding. I was working in the shadows because that's where the truth had finally found me. And her name was Mira. The night we finally tried to build the first working prototype felt strangely quiet, as if the world outside already knew what we were about to attempt. The Bronx Library had closed early for maintenance, so Mira and I headed to a place I had avoided for weeks, Henry Park's apartment. Henry had been my senior systems engineer for years, one of the few people who didn't turn his back when my scandal hit the news. When I called him that morning, his voice cracked with something that almost sounded like relief. "You finally figured out you're not alone," he said. "Come over. Bring whoever helped you." He didn't know what that meant, not yet, but he welcomed us anyway. His apartment was cluttered with hardware parts, stacks of old servers he refused to throw away, and whiteboards filled with abandoned formulas. It smelled faintly of solder and instant ramen, perfect for starting over. When Mira stepped inside, she froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the chaos. Henry noticed and grinned. "Welcome to the temple. Creativity looks messy up close." She smiled shyly, then set her backpack on the table. I cleared a space on the main desk while Henry pulled out his laptop and asked, "You finally ready to show me what dragged you out of hiding?" I nodded, unfolding the worn page from my jacket pocket. The page that had started everything. The page Mira had saved. Henry studied the scribbles, the strike-throughs, Mira's pencil corrections. His eyebrows rose. "Who wrote these fixes?" Mira lifted her hand slightly. "I just made some notes." "Notes." Henry let out a low whistle. "These aren't notes. These are structural repairs." He looked at me. "Where did you find her?" I almost said fate, but instead I said, "She found me." We spread out our laptops and Mira's notebook on the table. A second page, a third, all filled with revisions tests, sketches. Henry scanned everything with growing intensity. "You two rebuilt the timing spine. You corrected the feedback loop. You fixed the pivot bias. Adrian, this is the strongest version of the model I've ever seen." For the first time in weeks, hope didn't feel dangerous. It felt real. We began coding. Henry typed quickly, swearing under his breath whenever a module failed to load. Mira sat beside me, rewriting portions of the logic in real time with her pencil before translating them into clean Python. I moved between adjusting the architecture and recalibrating the market assumptions. Hours passed, then more. The hum of old servers filled the room. Midnight came and went. At one point, Mira's head nodded forward, nearly falling asleep sitting up. I nudged a cup of tea toward her. She blinked at it, then whispered, "Still chamomile." "Always I said." She gave a tired smile and kept working. By 2 a.m, the prototype was ready. Henry leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "All right, we run it with the last 6 months of historic market data. If there's even a heartbeat in this thing, we'll see it." My pulse hammered as he loaded the data feed. Mira hugged her notebook to her chest like a shield. The screen flickered. Lines of code scrolled. The first prediction cycle began. For a moment, nothing made sense. The numbers merged, separated, recombined. Error rates pulsed red. Feedback loops trembled. Then, as if settling into alignment, everything snapped into place. The metrics stabilized. The indicator line began to climb. Henry exhaled so sharply it sounded like a gasp. No way. Mira stepped closer, her breath hitched. The model projected future volatility with frightening accuracy. It corrected distortions instantly. It identified false sentiment spikes. It flagged fraudulent patterns. It was alive. My hand shook as I reached for the mouse. Henry whispered, "Adrian, this is not just functional. This is groundbreaking." Mira looked between us, eyes wide. "Is it really working?" I nodded slowly, unable to speak. All the exhaustion, all the humiliation, all the fear I had swallowed for weeks collapsed at once. My throat tightened painfully. Then the tears came, quiet at first, then harder. I covered my eyes with my hand, embarrassed by the intensity. Mira stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. Then she set her notebook down gently and placed her hand near mine on the desk, not touching, just close enough for me to feel her presence. Henry looked away politely, pretending to rearrange cables. The projection finished its cycle. Results beyond anything I had ever achieved, even at the height of my career. Mira whispered, "You did it." I shook my head. No, we did it. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the servers. For once, silence felt full instead of empty. When I finally lifted my head, Mira was still watching me with an expression I had never seen directed at me. Not pity, not admiration. Something quieter, warmer, like she understood the weight I had been carrying and didn't expect me to lift it alone anymore. Henry clapped his hands once. "All right, emotional moment over. We need a plan. Tomorrow you pitch this." I blinked. "To who?" He smirked. "The investors who didn't abandon you. They're still watching. They're waiting for proof you're not finished." I hesitated. "My reputation is still ruined. They'll laugh me out of the room." "Not with this," Henry said. "And not with Mira's fixes." Mira stepped back, startled. "I don't need credit. You're getting it anyway," Henry replied. "You literally saved the model." She flushed, shaking her head. "I just saw things." I leaned forward. "That is exactly what this algorithm needed. Someone who sees what everyone else missed. Someone the industry never bothered to look at." She looked at the floor, overwhelmed. Henry smacked the table. "Pitch meeting tomorrow. This algorithm hits the world in 48 hours. And Adrian," he pointed at my chest, "you get your life back." I looked at the screen again, at the green metrics, at the clean cycles, at the future slowly revealing itself, and for the first time since the collapse, I believed him. But I didn't just get my life back that night. I got a purpose, and I got Mira. Even if neither of us said it out loud yet. The morning of the pitch felt like stepping into a past life wearing someone else's skin. I had not walked into a corporate lobby in weeks, not since the day cameras cornered me in the rain and security treated me like an intruder in my own empire. But this time, I wasn't walking into Cole Analytics. That place had already branded me guilty long before the investigation began. Henry chose a private venue, a quiet conference center on the 10th floor of an older midtown building. Neutral territory, no press, no board members who wanted me gone. Just 5 former investors, men and women who had known the early days of my career before the headlines twisted my name into something else. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a laptop that felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. It held the prototype, my second chance. My entire future compressed into lines of code that Mira had brought back to life. Henry was already inside, adjusting cables and muttering about outdated projectors. When he saw me, he gave a small, approving nod. "You look like a CEO again." I gave a humorless smile. "I feel like an imposter." He shrugged. "Everyone does before they stand back up." Mira waited behind the curtain at the back of the room. She wasn't comfortable being up front, and I didn't push her, but I needed her here. Her presence steadied me in a way I didn't understand yet, a quiet reminder that genius didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hid in the margins of a lost page. Investors arrived gradually, exchanging stiff greetings. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with thinly veiled doubt. One in particular, a man named Donovan, didn't bother hiding his skepticism. "Adrian, I hope you aren't wasting our time." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't have something real." They settled into their chairs. The room went silent. It was time. I stood before them, aware of every breath. "This past month has been the worst of my life," I said plainly. I didn't dress it up, didn't defend myself. The lies already had enough airtime. Instead, I told them what mattered. Coal Analytics fell because of a fraudulent signature. My accounts were frozen because of a misfiled contract. The board forced me out because they were afraid, and I accepted it because I had nothing left to show them. Until now. I opened the first slide. Apollo 91. There was a murmur across the room. They remembered the rumors, the abandoned project, the idea too ambitious to finish in time. I saw the doubt rise again, but for once I didn't shrink from it. Over the past few weeks, I rebuilt this model from the ground up. The algorithm you're about to see predicts market volatility at a rate we once thought impossible. It corrects distortions in real time. It eliminates sentiment bias. It recognizes fraudulent patterns before they hit the market. Henry dimmed the lights and launched the simulation. At first, the projections flickered. The room leaned in. Then the data unfolded cleanly, smoothly, with precision that even I hadn't fully appreciated. Every cycle hit. Every projection matched historical behavior. Every anomaly flagged instantly. One investor whispered, "My God!" Donovan's arms, once crossed, slowly lowered. Henry glanced at me and smirked. "They're hooked." I clicked to the results slide. Apollo 91 predicted the credit risk collapse 6 months early. It flagged the inflation ripple before the markets did. It even caught bad data inputs from sources the industry relies on. Silence followed. Heavy electric. Then a voice from the back, who fixed the timing flaw. It came from a woman who had invested in my company since year one. She leaned forward. That flaw was why Apollo 91 never passed the first simulation. Who corrected it? This was the moment most CEOs would grab credit. But I wasn't that man anymore. "Someone the industry never bothered to notice," I said. "Someone this world overlooks because she doesn't come from an Ivy League background or a corner office." The room murmured in confusion. Behind the curtain, Mira tensed. She thought I was about to expose her, but I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. I pointed to the projection. This algorithm was saved by a mind sharp enough to see what all of us missed. If this model succeeds, it is because someone outside this industry understood it better than those inside it. One investor looked around. "Where is this person?" Henry stepped in. "She prefers to stay unseen for now." Another ripple of whispers. They were intrigued, and that was enough. The final simulation ended. The numbers didn't just stabilize, they soared. I closed my laptop slowly. Apollo 91 works, and with it I can restore everything Coal Analytics lost. But I won't do it alone. I am rebuilding from the ground up, with new leadership, new ethics, new voices in the room. If you still believe in me, if you believe in what this company once stood for, then join me. If not, I understand. The silence stretched, long enough for doubt to claw up my throat. Then the oldest investor in the room stood. "Adrian, we're in." One by one, the others nodded, even Donovan. When I stepped off the small stage, the adrenaline crashed out of me. I exhaled shakily, gripping the table for balance. Mira stepped out from behind the curtain. Her expression was soft, slightly overwhelmed. "They believed you," she whispered. I shook my head. "They believed us." She looked down, then back up. Her eyes glistened. A small, quiet smile, the kind that meant more than applause. Public redemption didn't come with headlines or applause. It came in that small, dim room with 5 investors who decided I was not finished. It came in the steady gaze of a girl who never asked for recognition. And it came with the realization that I wasn't climbing out of the ruins alone anymore. The twist did not arrive with fanfare or a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, like most life-changing truths do, slipping into my day when I least expected it. 3 mornings after the pitch, while Henry and I were setting up a private server for the new prototype, my phone vibrated with a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it. Unknown calls were almost always reporters or opportunists now. But something made me answer. Mr. Cole, this is Special Agent Rivas from the Federal Financial Crimes Bureau. My breath caught. We need to speak with you regarding your former CFO. For a moment, the world narrowed into a tight, echoing tunnel. My former CFO, William Garner, had been with me since year 3. I had trusted him more than anyone besides my mother. I forced my voice steady. What about him? Agent Rivas replied. We have new evidence regarding the forged signature. Are you available to come in? 2 hours later, I sat across from 2 agents in a windowless interview room, the kind usually reserved for suspects, not victims. But I had learned the hard way that truth didn't care about optics. Agent Rivas slid a folder toward me. Inside were screenshots, emails, transaction ledgers. Each one hit like a punch. The forged contract you were blamed for, he said calmly, was created on Mr. Garner's personal device. We matched the metadata. We have the original file. My heart pounded painfully as I stared at the dates, the timestamps. He continued, he used your digital signature from an older archived agreement. It was precise enough to pass verification, but low resolution enough to flag during a deeper scan. We also found encrypted transfers into an offshore account under a shell corporation that he owns. He paused as if giving me time to absorb the betrayal. It amounted to $34 million. Your company was collapsing because he executed a plan to quietly liquidate assets before disappearing. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. I had spent weeks believing the world had turned on me without reason. I had forced myself to accept being hated, doubted, dragged through the mud. But the truth was worse. Someone I had trusted had aimed the knife. I asked the only question that mattered. Why? The agent gave a small shrug. Greed. Resentment. Maybe he thought the company had outgrown him. Maybe he thought he deserved more. We may never know. I leaned back as the room tilted slightly. Agent Rivas added, I want to be clear. You are no longer under investigation. You've been officially cleared of wrongdoing. I closed my eyes. The relief wasn't gentle. It hit hard, sharp, almost painful in its intensity. When I walked out of the federal building, the cold air tasted different, cleaner, lighter. Henry was waiting outside, leaning against his car with 2 coffees in hand. The second he saw my expression, he straightened. They cleared you. I nodded once. His face softened with something like pride. Knew you weren't done. On the drive back, he said, You should tell Mira. I stared out the window. I know, but how do you tell someone that your life was stolen by the man you trusted most? How do you make sense of it without falling apart again? When I finally texted Mira to meet that evening, she replied immediately. Sure. Same cafe as before. I typed yes. But when I arrived, she wasn't sitting in our usual spot near the window. She was outside, pacing nervously, hugging her notebook to her chest. When she saw me, she rushed forward. Is something wrong? You sounded, I shook my head. Mira, sit with me. We found a bench under the yellow glow of a street lamp. Cars passed slowly. The city murmured around us. I told her everything about the forged contract, the metadata, the offshore accounts, being cleared, being betrayed. With every sentence, Mira's eyes widened, her hand tightening around the edge of her notebook. When I finally finished, she whispered, Adrian, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of that. Something inside me cracked. The quiet empathy in her voice reached parts of me I had locked away for years. Before I could respond, she asked softly, So what happens now? I took a slow breath. The investors want to move forward. They want Apollo 91. They want a relaunch, and they want me to lead it. Mira stared, stunned. They trust you again. I nodded, but that wasn't the part that mattered most to me. I added, They also asked how the algorithm was fixed. Mira stiffened. I didn't tell them your name. She looked down, visibly relieved. But I told them the truth, that someone brilliant saved the model. someone the industry would have ignored. Her voice shook. I didn't do it for credit. I know, that's why you deserve it. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything went quiet. Then I told her the final piece. They want to offer you 2 things. First, a full scholarship to complete your data science degree. Mira froze, her lips parted in disbelief. Second, a formal internship with the team once the program starts. She blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. Adrian, I don't think I'm ready for something like that. I'm just a janitor. I smiled sadly. You're not just anything. You are the reason this company can rise again. She shook her head. I'm not strong enough. I'm not like you. I didn't let her finish. Mira, you are exactly like me. You see the world differently. You solve problems nobody else notices. And you stood by me when I had nothing to offer. You earned every bit of this. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She whispered, What if I fail? Then I'll be there, I said quietly, and we'll figure it out together. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She simply leaned her head toward me, not quite touching my shoulder, but close enough that I felt the warmth of her presence. The city kept moving, unaware of the 2 people on a worn bench rediscovering hope. Being cleared of every accusation didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release, like finally stepping out of a storm that had lasted far too long. But sitting beside Mira, watching her fight to believe in her own worth, I realized something. Redemption wasn't the twist. She was. A full year passed before I realized just how much had changed. Not suddenly, not in one triumphant moment, but in quiet increments like watching winter soften into spring without noticing the exact day the snow stopped falling. Cole Analytics was no longer the same company I had once built on sleepless ambition and rigid perfection. It was smaller now, leaner, wiser, and strangely warmer. The scandal was behind us. The new investors were steady. Apollo 91 was already being whispered about across financial circles as the model that could redefine predictive analysis for an entire generation. Yet the heart of the company wasn't in its code anymore. It was in the people who rebuilt it. People like Henry, people like Mira, especially Mira. The scholarship had changed her life in ways she could barely articulate. She completed her program with honors, though she never once bragged about it. She still carried her old notebook everywhere, even as she transitioned into her new role as a junior analyst. I would sometimes pass her office and see her scribbling pencil notes in the margins of a printed dataset, hair tied up hastily, sleeves rolled just past her elbows, completely absorbed. If someone had told me 2 years ago that one of the sharpest minds in my company would be someone who once mopped its floors at 2 in the morning, I wouldn't have believed them. Not because I thought it impossible, but because I had been too blind back then to look beyond resumes and resumes. She taught me how wrong I had been. Our connection wasn't fast or dramatic. It didn't sweep in like a romance novel. It came quietly, like the way you begin to trust someone without remembering the exact conversation that started it. We had fallen into a rhythm, an unspoken understanding. She brought me chamomile tea on days when stress chewed at me. I left protein bars on her desk during long coding nights. She asked questions that surprised me with their depth. I listened to her ideas even when she thought they were too small. We didn't flirt. We didn't push. We just existed together in a growing comfort neither of us named, and it was enough. When the launch of Apollo 91's newest version approached, the board insisted on a major event. Investors, press partners, all eager to see what the reborn Cole Analytics had become. I dreaded the spotlight, but I knew I owed it to the people who rebuilt it alongside me. The venue was a tall, glass-domed conference center overlooking the East River. Light pooled across the polished floors. Screens hummed quietly as staff prepared for the reveal. I arrived early, pacing the backstage area with my note cards in hand, pretending I might use them. I never used note cards. My nerves were worse than usual. It wasn't the crowd. It wasn't the press. It was something else. Something I couldn't verbalize until Mira stepped in from the side hallway holding a stack of updated graphs and wearing a navy blouse that softened her normally guarded expression. Her hair was down for once, falling over her shoulders. She looked radiant, not because of the outfit, but because she carried herself differently now. More certain. more alive. When she saw me, her brows lifted. "You're pacing." I froze mid-step. "Just reviewing." Her lips twitched. "You don't review. You improvise, and somehow it always works out." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She stepped closer, studying me quietly. "You're nervous." I opened my mouth to deny it, but she tilted her head in that way she did when she already knew the truth. So I admitted it. "Maybe a little." She reached out gently, straightening the corner of my jacket. "You'll be fine, and even if you're not, I'll be standing right here." Somehow that mattered more than anything I planned to say on stage. The room filled quickly. When the lights dimmed, I walked out to the podium, applause swelling into the air like a rising wave. I spoke about resilience, about rebuilding, about the night everything collapsed and the unexpected hands that helped pick up the pieces. Then I paused the final slide glowing behind me. "I want to tell you how Apollo 91 survived. Not through me, not through our investors, but because someone found value in a page I had thrown away. Someone saw possibility where the rest of us saw failure." Across the room, I saw Mira stiffen. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. I simply said, "One forgotten page saved everything." The audience erupted in applause, but Mira remained still. Eyes shimmering, hand pressed gently to her notebook like it was something sacred. After the event, people swarmed me with questions. Congratulations, praise, offers. But the only face I searched for in the crowd was hers. When she finally broke free and stepped toward me, I felt my heartbeat settle. "Adrian," she whispered, "you didn't have to say that." I shrugged lightly. It was the truth. She looked down, cheeks warm. "I kept that page," she said softly. I nodded. "Good. I hope you keep it forever." The room emptied slowly until the echoes faded. The city lights glittered across the river like scattered gold. We walked outside together, the crisp air brushing against us. Mira hugged her notebook close. "I'm glad I didn't throw it away," she said. I turned to her. "Me too." She met my gaze, and something shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Not a confession, not a grand declaration, just a quiet understanding that whatever we were building between us was real, steady, and unfolding at its own pace. She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing mine. Not by accident, not by mistake, just enough to say, "I'm here." And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. The collapse had taken everything from me. But that single page had given me something back that I didn't know I'd lost. Not a company, not a reputation, a connection, a beginning, a future I didn't have to walk toward alone. Sometimes life does not break in the big dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones when a single page slips from your hand and the world decides you are finished before you have the chance to stand up again. And if Adrian's story means anything at all, it is this simple truth. We forget far too easily. One small act, one second chance, one quiet heart noticing what everyone else overlooked can change the entire direction of a life. Because while the world shouted that he was guilty, worthless, done a girl who cleaned floors at 2 a.m, knelt down, picked up a page no one else cared about and believed it still had value. And maybe that is what we all need reminding of, especially in a world so loud and impatient that it forgets how fragile we are beneath the surface. That the person dismissed as a failure may simply be carrying more weight than anyone can see. That the nobody in the corner might be the one whose brilliance saves an entire company or an entire soul. And that redemption rarely comes wrapped in applause, but in the form of someone who whispers, "I see you," when the rest of the world turns away. So if this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of the quiet resilience still living in ordinary people, if it made you think of the pages in your own life that you almost threw away too soon, then stay with us, 'cause here we tell stories that soften the hard edges of the world. Stories that step into the parts of your heart. You forget to visit stories for anyone who has ever been misunderstood, overlooked, or pushed aside, stories for those who still believe in kindness even after the world tried to take it from them. And if you have ever lost everything and had to rebuild from the ground up, or if you have ever been the one who believed in someone no one else noticed, then this place was made for you. So take a breath. let the weight slip from your shoulders, and remember that your next chapter may already be waiting in the hands of someone you least expect. Maybe a stranger, maybe a friend, maybe even yourself in a moment of courage you haven't found yet. And if Adrian and Mira taught us anything, it is that hope does not shout. It whispers, and sometimes that whisper is enough to start again. So if this journey touched you, if it felt like a reminder you needed, if it gave you warmth in a cold moment or faith in a dark one, then join us because we will keep telling stories that lift, heal, and remind you that even in a broken world, there are still pages worth saving. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story, the next second chance, the next forgotten page that might just change everything.